There is something quietly unsettling about the way you experience reality. Not because it feels false, but because it feels so convincingly real. Every thought you trust, every judgment you make, every belief you defend carries a strange certainty. And yet, that certainty has a history, a beginning you do not remember. Imagine for a moment that everything you consider obvious, your sense of right and wrong, your understanding of the world, even the way you interpret people, was not discovered by you, but absorbed, gradually, silently, without resistance. There is no clear moment where you chose your beliefs, no precise instant where you examined them and decided they were true. They simply became part of you. And because they have always been there, they feel natural. But familiarity is not the same as truth. And this is where the disturbance begins. Because if what feels natural has never been questioned, then what you call reality may not be reality at all. It may be something else, something constructed, something inherited, something you have been living inside without ever realizing it. At the beginning of the 20th century, when psychology was still attempting to define the limits of the human mind, Carl Jung introduced an idea that quietly disrupted the assumption of human self-awareness. He did not see the mind as a transparent system. He saw it as layered, structured, and partially hidden from itself. Jung proposed that beneath conscious thought exists a deeper psychological field, the unconscious. This was not merely a storage space for forgotten memories. It was an active, shaping force, a domain where instincts, suppressed experiences, inherited patterns, and symbolic meanings continue to influence behavior without direct awareness. According to this view, the individual is not fully in control of their own perception. What they see, what they feel, and what they interpret as reality is filtered through internal structures that were formed long before conscious reasoning matured. These structures are not random. They develop gradually through early experiences, cultural exposure, language, emotional conditioning, and repeated patterns of interpretation. Over time, they become stable frameworks through which the world is understood. And because these frameworks are internal, they are rarely questioned. They do not appear as influences. They appear as truth. Jung also suggested that the human mind carries something even deeper, what he described as collective patterns shared across individuals. These patterns shape the way people interpret symbols, meaning, identity, and even reality itself. This creates a subtle but powerful effect. When multiple individuals perceive the world through similar psychological structures, their interpretations begin to align. This alignment creates a shared sense of reality, not because reality itself is identical for everyone, but because the structures interpreting it are similar. Culture, language, and collective symbols reinforce these shared interpretations until they begin to feel unquestionable. At that point, perception and agreement merge. What is commonly believed becomes what is commonly accepted as real. Jung did not argue that reality is entirely false. He suggested something more precise and more unsettling. That reality, as experienced by the individual, is always mediated, filtered through psychological structures that operate silently. This means that the individual does not encounter the world directly. They encounter a version of it, constructed through layers of interpretation, emotion, memory, and unconscious influence. And because this process is continuous, the individual rarely notices it. There is no clear boundary between perception and construction. No visible moment where the mind transforms raw experience into meaning. The transformation is immediate, seamless, invisible. This creates a powerful illusion, the illusion that what is perceived is simply what exists. But if perception is shaped, filtered, and structured by forces outside conscious awareness, then certainty becomes fragile. Because what feels real may not be entirely independent. It may be influenced, subtly, consistently, and without resistance. Jung's relevance to this discussion emerges from this exact point. He forces a reconsideration of something most people never question: the reliability of their own perception. If the mind itself is involved in constructing reality, then the question is no longer whether reality exists. The question becomes far more complex. How much of what you call reality is actually being shaped by the very mind that believes it is observing it? What you see feels immediate, direct, unquestionable. The world unfolds before your eyes with a deceptive clarity. Objects assume form, events follow a narrative, and meaning appears to emerge naturally, as if reality itself conspired to be understood exactly as you witness it. Yet, this immediacy is an illusion. Perception is not a passive reception of the world. It is an active construction, a silent, relentless architecture of the mind. The senses report fragments, but the mind organizes them. It selects what matters, discards what does not, and fills in what is absent. What you notice is not all that exists. It is all that your mind permits you to notice. Meaning is not discovered, it is imposed. Memory, too, plays its subtle role. Past experiences infiltrate the present, bending perception like light through warped glass. Two people may witness the same event, yet one sees threat where the other sees chance, one betrayal where the other sees loyalty. Reality has not shifted, perception has. This engenders a quiet instability. Certainty, long trusted, begins to tremble. What feels obvious to one consciousness may be entirely invisible to another, and yet each mind experiences its own perception as truth. Here lies the deepest deception. The mind presents its interpretations not as constructions, but as the world itself. There is no internal alert, no whisper that reads, "This is filtered, incomplete, conditional." The experience feels seamless, coherent, undeniable. Questioning perception is not merely difficult, it is profoundly disorienting. To doubt perception is to doubt the lens through which all reality is apprehended. The mind resists this doubt, clinging to stability, preferring clarity over ambiguity, coherence over the unsettling chaos of uncertainty. But stability carries its own cost. If perception is constructed, reality is not purely external. It becomes entangled with the mind that interprets it, a fusion of the world as it exists and the mind as it molds it. Once this possibility is glimpsed, even faintly, the foundation shifts. Certainty wavers. Not enough to collapse completely, yet enough to allow doubt to creep into every observation, every conviction. And in that subtle fissure, a question emerges, silent, persistent, and disquieting. If reality is never simply given, how much of what we trust as truth is only the shadow of our own perception? If the previous section revealed that perception is a constructed experience, the next layer delves deeper, beneath awareness, beneath intention, into the hidden machinery that silently shapes thought. The conscious mind believes it is the pilot, steering through a world of objects and events. Yet beneath this surface lies a vast architecture, unseen and unacknowledged, where the true sculpting occurs. Carl Jung called it the unconscious, a realm not of random noise, but of systematic influence, where past experiences, latent desires, and unspoken fears converge to prefigure the mind's every interpretation. What reaches consciousness is already filtered, prearranged, edited by the mind before you even realize it. You witness the world, but only through a lens forged in silence, carved from layers of memory and instinct. This hidden architecture is both intimate and alien. It harbors impulses never spoken, anxieties never acknowledged, and longings never acted upon. It is a repository of shadows, quietly arranging your reactions, your judgments, your sense of self. Every hesitation, every attraction, every fleeting judgment is in part orchestrated here. And yet, the conscious mind assumes agency, unaware of the subtle manipulations taking place in corridors it cannot traverse. Fears buried in early experiences may dictate what you avoid, shaping perception as much as any immediate stimulus. Desires, sometimes unrecognized even to yourself, tilt attention towards some realities and away from others. Conditioning, the cumulative echo of social and familial structures, whispers imperceptibly, telling the mind what is safe to see and what must be ignored. The world appears coherent, rational, and controlled, but coherence is a carefully curated illusion. In this subterranean domain, the mind is no passive recorder. It is an active constructor, tirelessly assembling fragments of input into narratives, meaning, and identity. What feels like instinct or reason is often the silent echo of hidden patterns, deeply embedded and unquestioned. And therein lies the unsettling truth. The self you recognize, the conscious observer, is only the tip of a vast, unseen structure. Its decisions, its perceptions, even its beliefs are never entirely free. You inhabit a mind that interprets, censors, and directs without consent. Reality, as it seems, is always mediated. As awareness of this hidden architecture grows, so too does a disquieting realization. The certainty with which you navigate the world may be no more than the mind's silent, ceaseless arrangement. And yet, that certainty feels undeniable, even as its foundations are built in shadow. Illusions persist not because the mind is weak, but because it seeks sanctuary. The world is unpredictable, chaotic, and often hostile to reason. To confront reality without filters is to face a void, a disorienting expanse where meaning is neither fixed nor forgiving. The mind, recognizing this threat, gravitates toward familiarity. It favors patterns, narratives, and certainties. Even if they are constructed, even if they are false, beliefs, once internalized, form invisible scaffolding. They shape perception, guide thought, and stabilize emotion. The familiar feels safe because it reduces uncertainty. What is known, even imperfectly, provides a psychological anchor. Every repeated explanation, every predictable pattern, every socially shared assumption becomes a refuge. The mind clings to it, sometimes with unconscious desperation. Yet this comfort comes at a cost. Stability is achieved not through truth, but through selective omission, distortion, and suppression. In constructing coherence, the mind shields itself from anomalies, contradictions, and unsettling possibilities. It filters out experiences that threaten equilibrium, prioritizing a version of reality that maintains emotional security over factual fidelity. What is consistent feels correct. What feels correct becomes unquestionable. This introduces a subtle but relentless tension. The illusions the mind protects are not accidental. They are actively maintained. Doubt is a danger. Contradiction is a threat. Curiosity, once unfettered, is tempered by the instinct for psychological preservation. The very structure of consciousness conspires to preserve the comfort of what is familiar. And herein lies the disquieting insight. The mind does not merely perceive reality, it defends its own interpretations. What you trust, what you accept as reality, is less an objective observation than a carefully preserved illusion, chosen for its ability to soothe rather than to illuminate. To question it is to disturb the mind's equilibrium, to provoke anxiety, to destabilize the fragile scaffolding upon which identity and understanding rest. The familiar illusion is a sanctuary built on shadow. It shelters, but it also blinds. It offers comfort, but it imposes a subtle imprisonment. And as this truth emerges, one begins to realize that the very security the mind seeks may be inseparable from the distortions it will not relinquish. The mind does not exist in isolation. Its constructions, its illusions, are not solely private phenomena. They are continuously shaped and reinforced by the social world. What you accept as reality is often the echo of collective assent, the resonance of shared belief. Cultural norms, media narratives, and the ceaseless rhythm of public discourse provide invisible scaffolding, supporting the perceptions you hold as self-evident. Society offers coherence, but at a subtle price. Shared assumptions simplify experience, creating a predictable framework in which individuals can navigate the world. The familiar illusions of the mind are amplified when they are mirrored by others. When beliefs are repeated, celebrated, and seldom challenged, they acquire the weight of certainty. Consensus is the mind's most persuasive ally. It validates perception not through evidence, but through repetition and conformity. Media, rituals, and social institutions serve as instruments of this reinforcement. Stories are told, images circulated, ideas reiterated, all contributing to the construction of a reality that feels universal, unquestionable, and inevitable. The individual perceives the world not only through personal filters, but through the layered lens of collective agreement. What is unusual, discordant, or contradictory is quietly marginalized or dismissed, leaving the mind cocooned in a socially sanctioned narrative. The effect is profound. Personal perception and social conditioning converge. Reality becomes not merely internalized, but collectively sanctioned. Doubt is muted by the weight of agreement. Uncertainty is softened by the illusion of omnipresent validation. The mind, which might otherwise tremble at its own instability, finds reassurance in the chorus of society. Yet this reinforcement is also a subtle form of confinement. When illusions are shared, they acquire authority. When they are rarely questioned, they become nearly impervious to insight. The comfort of alignment masks the artificiality of perception, while the repetition of collective belief transforms private construction into apparent truth. And so, the individual experiences reality as both intimate and externally sanctioned, unaware that much of what feels undeniable is merely the reflection of a broader social architecture. The illusion persists, not in spite of society, but because society ensures its survival. Certainty, once a foundation, begins to tremble. The structures of thought that sustained confidence now reveal their fragility. What was assumed to be immutable, truths, beliefs, perceptions, unravels under the scrutiny of introspection. Each conviction, once unquestioned, shows itself as a construct, meticulously assembled by mind and society, yet not unassailable. The shift is subtle at first. A pause, a hesitation, a fleeting awareness that perhaps what you held as obvious is, in fact, contingent. The familiar patterns, the comforting narratives, no longer provide unshakable reassurance. The mind, accustomed to coherence, now encounters a dissonance it cannot resolve. Doubt seeps into perception, threading through memory, thought, and expectation. This is not revelation, and it is not clarity. It is tension, unsettling, persistent, and relentless. The very act of perceiving reality becomes laborious. The mind searches for anchors that no longer exist, for stability in a landscape stripped of certainty. Familiar illusions, personal, social, psychological, reveal themselves as scaffolding rather than substance. And without scaffolding, the self experiences a vertigo of understanding, aware that everything once trusted is provisional, mutable, and potentially illusory. Yet the collapse does not yield insight. It does not illuminate an alternative. It leaves only awareness of instability, a quiet terror of a world and a self whose contours are uncertain. The comfort of consistency, the security of shared reality, and the authority of perception all dissolve into the awareness of constructedness. In this void, the mind confronts a stark question. If certainty is fleeting, if reality is filtered, mediated, and socially reinforced, how does one navigate existence when even the most fundamental truths feel suspended, ephemeral, and unclaimed? the final revelation turns inward. The instability previously traced through perception, memory, and social reinforcement now permeates the very notion of identity. What you have always called self begins to appear less as an originator of thought and more as a constructed edifice, a composite of inherited beliefs, unconscious patterns, and filtered experiences. Every choice, every preference, every conviction is imbued with the subtle imprint of forces you rarely perceive. Family, culture, language, and society have left invisible fingerprints, shaping desires, fears, and the contours of judgment. Even introspection, the act of examining your own mind, operates within frameworks silently imposed, limiting what can be seen and understood. The self, it seems, is never fully autonomous. This realization is disquieting because it is unavoidable. It is not a theory to be pondered from a distance. It is lived, enacted in every thought and decision. The I that experiences, evaluates, and acts is entwined with constructions inherited, adopted, and reinforced over a lifetime. Autonomy feels partial, contingent, and fragile, and yet, the mind resists surrendering this notion of agency. It clings to identity even as it trembles under the weight of its own artificiality. The viewer is left with a profound tension. The self, the most intimate and sacred sense of being, may be simultaneously known and unknowable, trusted and fabricated. In this unresolved awareness, comfort collapses entirely. There is no anchor, no external reassurance. The question lingers quietly, persistently, and uncomfortably. If the self is a construction, then who, ultimately, is the one observing, deciding, and believing? We arrive at the edge of understanding, and there is nothing to grasp. Every perception traced, every belief examined, every identity explored, now dissolves into uncertainty. If the world we see is constructed by mind and memory, and if the self we trust is shaped by unseen patterns, then the notion of an objective reality falters. What once seemed solid now wavers, revealing the fragility of certainty itself. No resolution emerges. There is no comforting conclusion, no framework to restore stability. Only the quiet weight of a question that refuses to settle. How much of what we believe, what we claim as our own thought, is truly ours? How much is inherited, conditioned, or reflected from a world that itself is filtered through countless minds? In this stillness, the mind becomes both observer and observed, caught between recognition and doubt. Every certainty, every anchor, every measure of reality is shadowed by the possibility that it is partial, mediated, constructed. And so, the question lingers, persistent and unanswerable. It occupies thought without relief. It is not a challenge to be overcome, but a presence to be felt. In this awareness, the documentary concludes, not with clarity, but with reflection. The viewer is left suspended, unsettled, quietly confronting the unknowable architecture of perception, identity, and reality itself.